US's own CBO forecasts fatal debt burden ahead. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, and the Gold and Silver Standard, as the Ainslie Group celebrates 50 years. Today, we welcome James for his debut Insights episode, taking a closer look at the article he wrote for the news today, exploring the US government debt burden that shows no signs of slowing down. Welcome, and how are you going today, James?
Good to be with you, Chris. Doing pretty well. Met some really nice people today in at the Brisbane, offices. So it's been a good day.
Excellent. Now, it's great to have you as part of the team here. We'll try and be gentle with this process. I know it's a bit of a learning experience when you're coming
Thank
on
you.
in front of the camera, but it was a great article today that talked about something we've been talking about a lot as part of Insights, this idea of US government debt. You dug into the numbers a little bit specifically, but can I start you off just with a little bit of elaboration around what type of government spending is causing or is the most biggest contributor to what we've been seeing here? Because you highlighted that the public debt by 2034 is just out of control. I mean, you could argue it's already out of control. Give us that little bit of background.
Sure. So the biggest ticket items for this spending are things that most people will be aware of on some level. We're talking about social security spending, Medicare and Medicaid, as well as, of course, the rising costs of interest repayments on the debt. On top of that, we know that the US spends quite a bit on defence, which is going to have a huge impact, and that all these categories are expected to grow over the coming decade, in particular the healthcare costs due to the US's aging population.
I mean, there's some speculation. I know when I've been looking at those numbers that potentially they're even underestimating it because they don't really take into account what could happen if significant war breaks out. And let's face it, that's on the horizon.
Yes, it is. If you pay enough attention, there are harbingers of war everywhere you look, and this is probably the dangerous position that the US is getting themselves into. If debt to GDP is projected and does grow above 150%, then it leaves them in a vulnerable position. At that level, their economy is going to be undermined, and they will start to lose some legitimacy internationally and credibility. Of course, there'll be higher borrowing costs and potentially a credit downgrade for the US. If they find themselves facing a crisis, a black swan event, and they are hamstrung, then they're going to be really vulnerable. And the dollar particularly will be vulnerable. We've got areas of the world like the BRICS nations who are looking at alternatives to trading with the US dollar. Yep. It's not looking good.
And I think you just raised a really important point there, this idea that they're not allowing any breathing room here for a black swan, for something that just comes out of the blue. And we mentioned war before. That's one. I know Sam was talking about that yesterday. That it really is sitting there in the background all the time. We're concerned about escalations that could occur. There's not a lot of leeway left in it here. And ultimately, does that, for the US dollar, for example, does that swiftly undermine its authority? I mean, it's an interesting debate, isn't it?
It is. I would say it's already probably feeling undermined. I mentioned the BRICS nations. I think every nation in the world is starting to look really closely at the US dollar and whether it's in their interests to trade in US dollars. And yeah, it's a really precarious situation. They need to make some big decisions over there.
So thinking about if there is this potential, I know we've also been talking about the potential for a global recession. If that were to come about, do you think that comes into play as well? Because obviously, when we're talking about debt, what do they do then? Do they still print more, like create bigger debt to bail themselves out of that situation? What's your view if we do find that global recession, which is not really a black swan, like that's pretty much on the radar that people are expecting that happens? What's your view on that?
Oh, look, my view on that is from looking back into recent enough history. Let's take the COVID pandemic, for example, where they were facing some really tough economic conditions. The government increased their spending. They felt they needed to at the time, spending on social safety nets and economic stimulus. Of course, this is further injecting new dollars into the system, which further devalues the dollar, which further delegitimizes the dollar and causes people to look around and say, maybe we need to do something else. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a cycle. We've been talking about this for a long time, of course, but this is the sort of cycle that we're in at the moment, having no breathing room. And of course, I'll say it again, governments needing to look over their shoulder with regards to being re-elected every 4 years. I think that they'll take the easy option, and they will create more debt and lead us further down this path.
And I mean, it's not just you saying that. We've had a number of people now. It's a fairly consistent argument that comes through that that's what we think will happen. If we try to take the positive view of this, is there a way that the governments can grow out of it? Like, obviously, if there were policies in place, there is a hypothetical world, right, where you could get ahead of this by using pro-growth policies that counteract those challenges. What would they be? I know we're talking hypotheticals here because I know you've already highlighted you don't really think that's the way we're going. What would they be if we were to go down that path?
You're right. It's got to be pro-growth policies. It's got to be a bottom-up growth movement in the United States. So a lot of the things I'm about to say, many people will have heard in the past, but we're talking about tax reforms in the States. We're talking about incentivizations for investment and innovation, and any regulatory reforms that can reduce the red tape or the burdens for startups, entrepreneurs, small businesses to invest and grow their businesses. You've got to understand it's a really risky thing to take on, to be an entrepreneur, to start a new business, to create something new. And if at every stage of the journey they're being hit by hurdles, eventually, and they do, they're going to reach the point where they just turn away, and that's lost opportunity. So the US really needs that bottom-up growth.
And it's not just the US. I mean, Alex makes this point all the time here in Australia. She's saying, where is the incentive to be an entrepreneur these days? Because you've got so much regulation, so much red tape. It's challenging everywhere. I mean, the US as well, but certainly here at home, it's a challenge as well.
Oh, absolutely. We could substitute out the US for Australia in many of these conversations. We deal with the same pressures, and the more that we can open up pathways for people to take a risk, to get some investment, to invest their time and energy, the more growth we can expect. But we can't expect growth that is specifically and only sort of held up through some government stimulus, which at some point has to end.
I completely agree. So I think we can clearly say you don't believe it's realistic to expect that we're going to get significant policy changes. So with that background in mind, bring it back to gold, right? We'll wrap up sort of on this concept of the precious metals and how they fit here. What's your take? What's your view on precious metals in this mix to help investors prepare for what could be this economic landscape where really we don't expect the political climate to allow the changes necessary to come through?
Absolutely. So one of the key reasons that we love precious metals, that we love gold and silver and platinum at Ainslie, is due to its scarce nature. So if we find ourselves in an environment where there is being liquidity injected into the system from governments, so more dollars, we like the idea that those dollars are going to chase scarce assets and drive the prices up. We also know that gold in particular is a reassuring asset for many people in times of uncertainty, which we're absolutely in at the moment. And it feels like we might be in for quite a while. It's hard to see ourselves out of this one. Something's going to happen. So we certainly think that it's a really great option at the moment to help us all sleep better at night and protect our portfolios.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for your work on that today, James. I think, like I said, welcome to the Insights team. We'll be hearing more from you as it goes along. People can come in and have a chat in the Brisbane office. I know you're constantly there and willing and waiting for people to have a chat to you about all of these issues. So really appreciate your work on that. Thank you.
Always. Thanks, Chris. Talk next time.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. We'll chat again soon.